Rome, in the year 215 before Christ, stood trembling under a dark sky. Crops failed, livestock collapsed without cause, the temples were silent. And when thunder cracked over the city, it was not Jupiter the people feared, but something closer, something hidden inside their own homes. On one morning, 2 noble women were found gathering herbs near the Capitoline Hill. By nightfall, over 100 others would be named, and in the weeks to come, several would face a punishment that even the gods were said to turn away from burial, alive. Marcia Servilia walked the edge of the Tiber just before sunrise, a cloth basket resting on her hip, its rim already lined with sprigs of rue, crushed marjoram, and bitter fennel. She knew which plants eased childbirth and which ones ended it. Rome did not allow women to become physicians, but they came to her anyway. Senators' wives, maids, slaves, all with secrets stitched beneath their togas. She helped without judgment. She listened more than she spoke. That morning, as she bent to gather a drooping stalk of belladonna, she heard the clatter of hooves on stone above her. 6 horses. She counted them by sound before she saw their riders, lictors in white tunics. One held the rod-bound axes of the Republic, the fasces, and another unfurled a scroll. Her name was the second on the list. That night, Marcia was taken in silence. No charges were spoken, only that she would be questioned by the pontifex. Her neighbors closed their shutters. Her slave girl, Nona, wept but said nothing. At the Curia, the senators spoke of portents, floods, fires, barren fields. It had to be the women, they said. The women with their potions and incense, their rituals whispered in kitchens and courtyards. The women who no longer feared their husbands. One senator read aloud a line from the Sibylline books, Rome's most sacred prophecies. When poison runs like water, seek the hands that poured it. Marcia stood without shackles, but she knew the verdict had already come. In the holding chamber, she saw faces she knew: Aurelia Petreius, the merchant's wife, Calpurnia, a Vestal's cousin, all accused, all silent. None confessed, because none believed their innocence mattered. What had begun as a whisper of suspicion was now a storm, and in that storm, facts would drown. They were not witches. There was no word for that in Latin. They were healers, midwives, mourners, and now they would become soil. When the door to her cell closed that night, Marcia traced the rim of her herb-stained fingers along the wall, imagining the shape of her own grave. Marcia sat in the dim chamber where stone walls oozed dampness and time moved without mercy. The air smelled of rust and old incense. No one had spoken to her in 2 days. Meals came in silence, placed on the floor without a word. Bread barely risen, water in a chipped clay bowl. But it was not hunger that hollowed her. It was the sound of voices beyond the door. Men deciding what she had meant when she'd crushed leaves, when she'd steeped roots, when she'd whispered prayers to no one in particular. Rome had never feared soldiers. It had feared silence, women's silence, what they did in courtyards, in birthing rooms, in shadow. That fear had grown louder than reason. On the 3rd morning, the guards brought her to the atrium of the temple. Marble columns glowed with morning light. A single man waited, dressed not in a magistrate's robes, but in the white of the pontifex. She recognized him. His name was Gaius Pinarius, and he had once sent for her when his wife could not carry past the 3rd month. She had helped them in secret. He did not greet her now. He unrolled a scroll, spoke of beneficium poisoning. Not physical, he said, not measurable, but moral. Rome, he claimed, was being slowly rotted by women who brewed thoughts into liquids. Women like her. He asked what herbs she had used in her last preparation. She answered plainly, silphium, myrrh, a touch of wine. He asked for whom. She told him. He asked if the woman still lived. She did not. She had died giving birth in the 7th hour of labor. Gaius paused. Looked at the others seated behind him, old men wrapped in wool, fingers stained with wax and ink. Not earth. They did not speak. They didn't need to. The outcome had already been written. He asked if Marcia had ever read from the Sibylline books. She hadn't. That was a priest's right, not a woman's. He asked if she'd ever owned a black hen. She blinked. What did that mean? He asked if she had ever spoken to the moon. She said nothing. The silence cracked something. Gaius rose. With ceremony, he declared her morally culpable, not for what she had done, but for what her actions resembled. The women of Rome, he said, had grown too curious, too bold. They whispered spells and brewed rebellion. They crossed lines that were once invisible, but now had to be carved into stone. Marcia was led away before she could ask the only question that mattered. If knowledge was poison, who decided which minds were allowed to drink it? The answer, she realized, lay not in justice, but in ritual. And ritual had no ears, only a mouth, one that swallowed names whole. The sentence was not shouted, nor carved into bronze. It came folded in parchment, carried by a boy no older than 10, who looked at Marcia with wide eyes before placing it on the floor and running away. She did not open it. She didn't have to. The guards returned before sundown, not with chains or lashes, but with linen, white, unmarked, and perfumed faintly with myrrh. Ritual demanded that the condemned appear clean, untouched, and veiled not for dignity, but so the gods might not be offended by the sight of a woman being punished. It was not called an execution. It was not even named a death. It was purification. The Pontifical College had spoken. The women found morally poisonous would be removed, not by sword or fire, but by earth. Rome had always feared blood in its streets, so it found quieter methods. A pit would be dug, a narrow space, just deep enough for kneeling. The woman would be dressed in ceremonial robes, lowered in silence, and sealed with stone. No cries, no last words, no priest present. The public was not invited. It was not meant to be seen, only remembered, and then, eventually, forgotten. Marcia touched the linen. It was smooth, woven tightly, like the togas of the highborn. She wondered if they gave it to all of them, or only the ones whose names had once mattered. She wrapped it around herself slowly, careful with the folds, not as an act of obedience, but because she had once dressed the dead herself. In childbirth, some did not survive. She had wrapped their bodies with this same quiet precision, whispering to their mothers that the gods would take them gently. No one came to prepare her. No one whispered that. Across the hall, another door opened. Calpurnia emerged, her veil crooked, eyes swollen from weeping. She looked at Marcia and tried to speak, but no sound came. The guards kept their heads down. One had a scar across his cheek. Another wore the scent of wood smoke. Ordinary men carrying out the extraordinary, as if routine. One of them held a wax tablet. Her name was inscribed on the list, scratched in neat letters. But something else caught her eye. 2 lines were already crossed out, not erased, just marked through. She looked at the blank space beneath her name and wondered if there would be another scratch there by nightfall. Outside the chamber, the sun had begun to sink behind the forum. Shadows stretched long across the marble. In the distance, the chants of the temple could be heard, not for her, not for the women beneath the earth, but for Rome itself. Always Rome, its glory, its peace, its gods. Everything else could be buried. They led her out under moonlight, not daylight. The city slept, or pretended to. Rome did not like to witness its own rituals. 2 guards walked ahead, 2 behind. No chains bound her wrists, but she understood this was not mercy. It was symbolism. The accused must walk freely to her burial, as if offering herself to the gods. Her feet moved slowly over the damp stones of the field of Mars. The grass had been trampled by the heels of those who dug the pit. It was not wide, not even a full pace across. Just enough space for a body to kneel, then fold. Wooden boards lay beside it, along with a clay jug of water and a single loaf of bread, ritual offerings, to make the act appear merciful. They would be placed inside with her before the entrance was sealed. Rome would tell itself she had not been killed, only left with the gods to decide her fate. A priest stood by, but he did not look at her. He did not speak. His eyes remained fixed on the stars, as if he were only a bystander. She was given no last words. Her name was not announced. Her sentence had already been recorded in the temple archives, beneath a heading that read, "Ritual Purification, Women Accused of Poisoning Through Superstition." The word sorcery did not appear. Rome had no word for it, only laws for what it feared. Marcia stepped toward the edge. She did not cry. She did not plead. The linen around her shoulders had begun to soak with dew. The priest motioned with his hand. The guards moved forward, slowly, and she allowed herself to be lowered. Her knees met the cold earth first, then her hands. There were no carvings on the walls of the pit, no symbols, just damp soil and silence. One guard handed down the jug. She took it. The bread followed. She set it beside her knees. Then came the board, thick, flat, and final. It slid into place across the opening, shutting out the stars. She could still hear the wind. Then came the scraping sound of earth, a dull, steady rhythm, shovel after shovel, thud, thud, thud. The weight above her grew heavier. The air thinned. She closed her eyes, not from fear, but from memory. She saw her mother's face, her father's garden, the first time she'd ground herbs with a stone, and prayed for someone else's pain to leave. She wondered if any of the women she had helped would remember her name, or if they would stay silent to survive. The last sound she heard was the dull knock of a stone being pressed into the soil above her head. After that, there was only Rome, quiet, cleansed, and satisfied. The next morning, the forum buzzed with merchants, soldiers, and children chasing each other between the pillars. The burial was not mentioned. No announcements were made. Rome had always excelled at forgetting what it did not wish to remember. The Senate reconvened before noon, draped in its usual stiffness and scented oils, debating grain supplies and naval losses as if no woman had ever been lowered into the earth the night before. A scribe entered with the wax tablets from the Pontifical College. He held them out, and the consul signed them without reading. The names were added to the official archives under the category of disruptions removed for the favor of the gods. Nothing else. No trial transcripts, no testimony, no funeral rites, just a list of women. Most were marked with a line through their name, neither living nor dead, erased by ritual. Marcia Servilia's name was the last on the tablet, followed by a blank space, then another line drawn with the same hand that had sealed her fate. Back in her family home on the Aventine, her belongings were already being sorted. The law forbade heirs of the condemned from claiming the estate, so her cousin petitioned the Senate for exception. He described her as unstable, possibly ill, a danger to herself and others. The scroll was approved without debate. Her house was cleared by the end of the week. Her books were burned in the courtyard, small volumes bound in wool, filled with notes on childbirth, fever remedies, and the lunar cycle. No one read them. They were deemed unfit for preservation. Nona, the slave girl who had served Marcia since childhood, was sold within 3 days. The man who bought her asked no questions. It was better not to know. Whispers still moved through the streets, women who refused to light lamps at night, children told not to touch certain herbs, but they did not speak Marcia's name. In Rome, memory was not sacred, it was political. And to speak the name of one who had been buried alive was to challenge the purity of the city. Livy would later write that this was not a time of injustice, but of necessary purification. He blamed the unrest on women's vanity, their freedoms, their straying from the duties of the hearth. The records reflected his tone. No mourning, no acknowledgement of doubt. The narrative was sealed, like the earth over the burial pit. Rome had survived. And survival, in the eyes of the Republic, always justified silence. The pit was covered with flat stones. No marker was placed. To visit the site was to risk suspicion. To grieve was to invite guilt. The women were gone, their names scratched into tablets, crossed out, and buried once more under the weight of official history. It was not poison that Rome feared. It was power that could not be controlled. In every law passed, every name erased, every ritual burial performed under moonlight, the message was the same: fear must be fed. And when gods are silent, fear will choose its own sacrifices. Marcia Servilia had no altar, no grave to tend. But in the dark corners of courtyards and kitchens, women still remembered. Not aloud, not in prayer, but in the way they hid their knowledge, softened their questions, and held their silence like a shield. Rome survived by cutting off the parts of itself it could not explain. Female knowledge, untamed compassion, midwifery without permission, all of it became threat. So they buried it, not just in soil, but in story. Even centuries later, the historians called it a scandal, not a slaughter. They focused on order, not on loss. And yet, beneath the field of Mars, the ground remembers. It remembers the sound of linen brushing against stone. It remembers the breath held back, the silence offered up like incense, the final closing of light. Rome called it ritual, but it was terror wearing white robes. And when terror becomes tradition, it becomes harder to see, harder to name, until it happens again, somewhere else, in another age. Different language, same silence. This is not a tale about witches. There were no curses cast, no black hens, no incantations whispered into boiling pots. This is a tale about women who knew things they were not supposed to know, who helped people they were not supposed to help, and who were buried for it not because they threatened Rome's body, but because they threatened its illusion of control. That illusion would rise again in other empires, other faiths, other courts of men who feared what they could not punish with words alone, and so they reached for dirt, for burial, for forgetting. But stories, even buried ones, grow roots. They rise again, through cracks in marble, through pages left unburned. And today you have found one. If this story moved you, don't let it stay buried. Like, comment, and subscribe. These forgotten lives deserve to be unearthed one truth at a time.